So we got hospital executives around the country responsible for making decisions that are supposed to be patients over profits and in the best interest of their community and patients and their healthcare workers and employees, right? Who are the hospital executives responsible for making such important decisions, right? Well, what if I told you there's a chance that they are a fraud, a criminal, a thief, an identity theft, an overall scumbag? Like this guy here, an Iowa hospital executive stole hot dog cart vendor's identity and used it for 3 decades while obtaining 200K in loans. While the victim was labeled as crazy, thrown into a mental hospital when he complained about the fraud and the identity theft that this guy was committing. What? Let's get into this. An Iowa hospital executive stole a hot dog cart vendor's identity in 1988 to rack up 200K in loans, marry and have a child using the stolen name while the victim was locked up in a mental hospital for trying to claim his own identity back. This guy, Matthew David Kierans, 58, is now facing up to 32 years in prison after he was convicted of one count of false statement to a National Credit Union Administration insured institution and one count of aggravated identity theft. Kierans stole the identity of William Woods, 55, in 1988 when the pair worked together on a hot dog stand in Albuquerque, New Mexico. He began to live under his name, taking out loans, getting married, and starting a successful career in IT. Woods discovered the fraud 30 years later and tried to reclaim his identity, but authorities did not believe him. Maybe because he was marginalized and labeled as a mentally ill patient? What does that sound like? Does that sound like a very common thing that happens to people with disabilities? Yeah, it sure does. How did Kierans get to this point in his life where he is working as a hot dog vendor, meets a poor guy, and steals his identity? Kierans, the man who was the thief, identity thief, was born in January 1966 and was adopted, along with his brother, and raised in San Francisco, California. His adoptive parents died in 1986 and 2000, according to the court documents. When he was 16, he ran away from his adoptive family's home and stole a car, driving to Oregon, where he was arrested but never appeared in court. He made his way to Albuquerque and started working on a hot dog stand where he met his victim, the real William Woods. Kierans stole his identity and his name and used it in every aspect of his life for the next 3 decades, according to court documents. In 1990, Kierans got a fake Colorado ID under Woods' name and birthday and used it to get a job at a fast food restaurant and a Colorado bank account. He then bought a car for $600.91, also using Woods' name, with 2 $300 checks that bounced. Kierans drove to Idaho. The stolen car broke down and he abandoned it, withdrawing all of his money from the Colorado account and leaving the state. From there, his fraud ramped up. In 94, still using Woods' name, Kierans got married and had a child, who he gave the surname of Woods, messing his entire family up. Wow. He then moved to Wisconsin and obtained a copy of Woods' birth certificate using the information about his family he found on Ancestry.com. Oh my God. Whew. In 2013, he got a job as a systems architect in the University of Iowa's hospital's IT department for nearly 10 years, earning more than $700,000 in total. He is considered a hospital executive in the IT department. What the fuck? Which means he has access to a whole bunch of patients' identifiable information. His co-workers' identifiable health information, a whole bunch of private information of everybody that's involved with this hospital system. But that's not it. Over the years, he took out multiple vehicle and personal loans from Iowa credit unions under Woods' name, worth more than $200K. Meanwhile, the real Woods was living homeless in Los Angeles. In 2019, Woods went to a branch of the National Bank and said he had discovered someone was using his bank accounts and had accumulated debt and asked to close the accounts. He gave the bank his ID and social security number, which matched the information the bank had, but he couldn't answer the security questions that Kieran's had set up. The bank called the number they had on file for him, Kieran's number, the fraud. And Kieran answered the security questions, telling the bank employees that no one in California had permission to use his accounts. The bank employees called LAPD, who questioned Woods and Kieran's. The real Woods, the guy whose identity was stolen, was then arrested and charged with identity theft and false impersonation when he's just trying to get his identity back and telling them, look, man, this guy stole my identity, but because he's homeless and a mental health patient, he was deemed as uncredible, while this IT fraud guy was completely believed and they went with his story. Unbelievable. But when Woods continued to insist that he was the real Woods, a judge ruled in February 2020 that he was not mentally competent to stand trial. He was sent to a mental hospital in California where he was medicated and confined. But in March 2021, Woods pleaded no contest to the identity theft charges, meaning he accepted the conviction but did not admit guilt and was sentenced to 2 years in jail. This guy was put to jail for being who he is and making claim to his own identity and standing strong on that. He was given credit for the 2 years he had already spent in county jail and hospital and was released under orders to stop using the name William Woods. What? He did not stop and continued to attempt to regain his identity, reaching out to police and financial institutions. Eventually, he managed to find out where Kieran's was working, and in January 2023, just last year, he contacted the hospital security department. The hospital referred his complaint to the University of Iowa Police Department, where Detective Ian Mallory opened an investigation. Mallory went on to find Woods' biological father and tested his DNA against Woods and Kieran's. The DNA proved that Woods was who he says he was, and Kieran's was a fraud. Wow. Then in July of 2023, more than 30 years after Kieran's first stole Woods' identity, Mallory interviewed him. He asked him what his father's name was, and Kieran's accidentally gave the name of his own adopted father. Can't get your lies straight. It was only when Woods contacted the university where Kieran's was working as an IT executive on a $140,500 salary that police investigated and did a DNA test on the two men, which revealed the truth. Kieran's then admitted to the decades-long fraud, telling investigators, "My life is over and everything is gone." He then confessed to prolonged identity theft, according to court documents, and was taken into custody on July 18th, 2023. He pleaded to one count of each charge and the other counts were dropped. A sentencing has not been scheduled. He is currently in the custody of the U.S. Marshal Services and faces a mandatory minimum sentence of 2 years imprisonment and a possible maximum sentence of 32 years imprisonment, and a $1.25 million fine and 5 years of supervised release following any imprisonment. You deserve everything you get, Kieran's. Everything you get.